Dawn breaks over Scotland like a wound opening across the sky. The 23rd of June, Anno Domini 1314. Mist clings to the Bannockburn, a modest stream that winds through marshland and woodland, unaware that its name will echo through centuries. The air smells of wet earth, trampled grass, and the sweat of 20,000 men who have marched 70 miles in 7 days. Banners snap in the morning wind. The golden leopards of England, the crosses of Wales, the standards of Brittany, Gascony, and Ireland, all converging on this narrow corridor of Scottish ground where destiny has chosen to make its stand. 2 miles south of Stirling Castle, an army of spearmen waits in the shelter of ancient oaks. They are farmers and shepherds, blacksmiths and beggars, barely 7,000 strong. Most wear no armor. Many have no shoes. Their weapons are simple: 12-foot pikes with sharpened iron tips, axes, daggers, faith. They have arranged themselves in tight formations called schiltrons, bristling circles of spears that move like living creatures, breathing in unison, expanding and contracting with disciplined rhythm. These men have been drilled for months by a king who knows that discipline, not numbers, will decide this day. Above them, from his small mount, Robert the Bruce surveys the field with the cold calculation of a man who has lost everything and clawed it back from ruin. 8 years ago, he murdered his rival in a church and seized a crown that no one recognized. He was hunted, defeated, driven into exile on barren islands where legend says a spider taught him perseverance. Now he commands not through birthright but through victories won in ambush, in night raids, in the systematic dismantling of English power castle by castle, stone by stone. His face is weathered, his hands scarred, his eyes sharp with the awareness that this battle will either confirm his kingship or erase it forever. Across the stream, the English host arranges itself in chaotic splendor. Knights in plate armor that cost more than villages. War horses bred in Flanders, each worth 100 peasant lives. Thousands of Welsh longbowmen, their yew-bows capable of punching through mail at 200 yards. And at their head, Edward II of England, son of the Hammer of the Scots, a man who has inherited his father's crown but none of his iron will. He has marched his army into exhaustion to relieve a single castle, driven by pride and the whispers of barons who doubt him. Between these two forces lies a stream, a stretch of bog, and a choice that will reshape the map of Britain. The sun climbs higher, steel glints, men pray, and history holds its breath. To understand Bannockburn, one must first understand the wound that Edward III of England carved into Scotland's soul. For a century, the two kingdoms had coexisted in uneasy peace, their borders porous, their nobility intermarried, their languages, Norman French, Scots, and Gaelic, mingling in castle halls. But in 1296, when Scotland's succession fell into dispute after the death of the child Queen Margaret, Edward I saw opportunity where others saw crisis. He was invited to arbitrate. Instead, he conquered. The English king chose John Balliol as his puppet, then treated him with such contempt that even Balliol eventually rebelled. Edward's response was biblical in its fury. He sacked Berwick, slaughtered its inhabitants, and marched through Scotland like a prophet of annihilation. He seized the Stone of Destiny from Scone, the Black Rood from Edinburgh, and proclaimed himself overlord of a nation he intended to erase. Castles were garrisoned, lands were forfeited, executions became commonplace. Scotland was not merely defeated, it was occupied, humiliated, reduced to an English province in all but name. Resistance came first from William Wallace, a commoner who raised an army of common men and defeated the English at Stirling Bridge in 1297. For one shining year, Wallace was guardian of Scotland, proof that courage could challenge empire. Then Edward III destroyed him at Falkirk, hunted him for 7 years, and finally had him hanged, drawn, and quartered in London, a public butchery designed to extinguish hope itself. The Scottish nobility surrendered. The cause seemed lost. But empires do not account for men who refuse to accept defeat. Robert the Bruce, Earl of Carrick, descended from Norman lords and Gaelic chieftains, had fought on both sides of this war, torn between pragmatism and principle. In 1306, he made a choice that would define him. He murdered his greatest rival, John Comyn, on the altar steps of a church in Dumfries, seized the Scottish crown, and declared war on England. Edward I vowed to destroy him. Bruce's brothers were executed, his wife and daughter imprisoned in cages, his supporters hunted like animals. He fled to the Western Isles with a handful of loyal men, an outlaw king with no kingdom. Then Edward I died. His son, Edward II, lacked his father's ruthless competence. Where the old king had been a hammer, the young one was a blade without an edge, easily distracted, poorly advised, resented by his own barons. Bruce returned from exile and waged a guerrilla war of stunning effectiveness. He ambushed supply lines, burned English garrisons, recaptured castles through stealth and cunning rather than siege. By 1314, only 2 English strongholds remained, Berwick on the border and Stirling, the key to the Highlands. When Bruce's brother laid siege to Stirling, its commander agreed to surrender by midsummer if not relieved. Edward II could not ignore such a challenge. His honor, his authority, his father's legacy, all demanded that he march north and crush the Scottish rebellion once and for all. He summoned the largest army England had ever sent into Scotland and rode to war. Robert Bruce, outnumbered 3-1, chose not to flee but to meet him in open battle. The stage was set for Bannockburn. Robert Bruce, King of Scots, was 40 years old in the summer of 1314, and every one of those years had carved itself into his flesh. Born into privilege, raised to speak 3 languages and fight from horseback, he had spent his youth navigating the treacherous politics of a kingdom torn between English domination and internal feuds. His grandfather had claimed the Scottish throne and lost. His father had served Edward III. Robert himself had fought alongside the English, then against them, then alongside them again. A weather vane in the storm of war, until the day he decided that some principles were worth damnation. The murder of John Comyn was not an accident. It was a calculated act of treason against England and sacrilege against God, committed on holy ground with full knowledge of the consequences. Bruce had invited his rival to a church in Dumfries, ostensibly to negotiate. Instead, he accused him of betrayal, drew his dagger, and struck him down before the altar. When told Comyn still lived, Bruce sent his men back to finish the work. For this, he was excommunicated by the Pope and outlawed by England. He had burned every bridge and declared himself king of a nation that barely existed. What followed was catastrophe. Edward I crushed him at Methven and Dalry. His army scattered. His family was captured or killed. He fled to the Isle of Rathlin with a handful of survivors sleeping in caves, reduced to myth. It was there, legend says, that he watched a spider attempt to spin its web 6 times and fail, only to succeed on the 7th try. Whether the story is true matters less than what it represents. Bruce learned patience, persistence, and the power of asymmetric warfare. He returned to Scotland in 1307 and waged a different kind of war. Not one of pitched battles, but of ambushes, raids, and sieges won through deception. He trained his men not as knights, but as disciplined infantry capable of holding formation against cavalry. By 1314, he had reclaimed almost all of Scotland, but he still faced a fundamental dilemma. His kingship was built on guerrilla victories, not on the open battle that medieval society recognized as the true test of legitimacy. Bannockburn was his chance to prove himself not just a raider, but a king. Across the battlefield stood Edward II of England, son of Longshanks, inheritor of a legacy he could neither escape nor fulfill. Born in Caernarfon Castle, Wales, in 1284, Edward was the 4th son, never expected to rule. When his older brothers died and the crown fell to him, England got a king who preferred poetry and theater to war, who lavished affection on male favorites, who clashed constantly with his barons. His relationship with Piers Gaveston, a Gascon knight, provoked such outrage among the nobility that they eventually murdered Gaveston and forced Edward to accept limits on his power. By 1314, Edward II was a king constantly trying to prove his strength to men who openly doubted him. The siege of Stirling gave him that opportunity. When word reached London that Bruce had cornered the English garrison and promised to take the castle by midsummer, Edward could not ignore it. To do so would confirm every whispered accusation of weakness. He summoned his barons, many of whom despised him, and demanded they bring their full strength. Some of the most powerful, 4 great earls, refused to come, but Edward pressed forward anyway, assembling an army so massive it seemed invincible. He marched north with 2,000 cavalry, 15,000 infantry, and the absolute certainty that numbers would prevail. But Edward made critical mistakes. He rushed his army 70 miles in 1 week, exhausting men and horses alike. He ignored the reports of experienced commanders who warned that the ground near Stirling favored defense. He allowed his force to camp in a narrow corridor between the Bannockburn and the River Forth, hemmed in by marsh and woodland. And most fatally, he underestimated Robert Bruce, dismissing him as an outlaw rather than recognizing him as a tactician who had spent 8 years preparing for exactly this moment. The two kings were opposites. Bruce, the guerrilla-made general, hardened by exile and failure. Edward, the prince-made king, undone by pride and inexperience. One fought to create a kingdom, the other fought to preserve an inheritance. And on the fields of Bannockburn, only one would survive the test. Robert Bruce chose his ground with the care of a man who knew that terrain could kill as surely as swords. The new park, a royal hunting preserve 2 miles south of Stirling Castle, was a patchwork of dense woodland, open field, and treacherous bog. To the east flowed the River Forth, wide and slow. To the south ran the Bannockburn, a stream that seemed harmless until one realized how easily it could trap an army. The ground between was deceptive, firm on the surface but soft beneath, especially after rain. Bruce positioned his forces in the woods on higher ground, where the trees would screen them from English archers and force any cavalry charge to funnel into narrow killing zones. For weeks, his men had been digging. They excavated rows of pits along the approaches, each hole deep enough to snap a horse's leg, then covered them with branches and grass so they appeared as solid ground. These were not mere obstacles. They were traps designed to transform English strength into liability. A cavalry charge that should have shattered infantry would instead collapse into chaos as horses stumbled and fell, throwing their riders into the mud where armored men would drown under their own weight. Bruce also placed wooden stakes at angles, creating additional barriers. Every detail was calculated. Every weakness in the English approach was anticipated. His army, though small, had been drilled to perfection. The schiltron formations were arranged in 4 divisions. Edward Bruce, the king's brother, commanded the vanguard. Thomas Randolph, Earl of Moray, held the northern flank facing Stirling. James Douglas, the most feared raider in Scotland, anchored the eastern side, and Robert himself commanded the reserve in the rear. Each schiltron was a circle or square of men, shoulder to shoulder. Their 12-foot pikes angled outward like the quills of a hedgehog. This formation was ancient, proven, deadly, but only if discipline held. One break in the line, one moment of panic, and the formation would collapse under the weight of English knights. Bruce's 500 cavalry, led by Sir Robert Keith, were held in reserve. They were lighter than English cavalry, mounted on smaller horses, armed for speed rather than shock. Their role was not to charge, but to harass, to chase down fleeing enemies, to protect the infantry's flanks. Bruce knew he could not match English knights in a direct clash. He had no need to. His plan was to make the English come to him, to force them to attack uphill, through bogs, into prepared defenses, where their numbers and armor would become encumbrances rather than advantages. Meanwhile, the English army arrived exhausted. Edward II had driven his forces with reckless haste, desperate to relieve Stirling before the June 24th deadline. His men had marched through heat and hunger, their supply wagons trailing far behind, their morale low. Many of the barons resented being summoned to fight for a king they did not respect. The 4 most powerful earls, Lancaster, Warwick, Arundel, and Surrey, had refused to come at all, their absence a public humiliation. The troops who did arrive were a mix of English knights, Welsh archers, Irish levies, and Scottish loyalists who sided with Edward. They were numerous but disunited, an army held together by obligation rather than loyalty. On the evening of June 23rd, the English host made camp in the low ground between the Bannockburn and the Forth. It was a poor position, cramped, marshy, difficult to maneuver in, but Edward's commanders seemed unconcerned. They believed that sheer numbers would overwhelm the Scots. They had not scouted the terrain carefully. They had not seen the hidden pits. They did not know that the woods above them concealed 7,000 men who had spent months preparing to turn this narrow valley into a killing ground. As darkness fell, the English lit fires and settled in, confident that tomorrow would bring victory. In the trees above, the Scots waited in silence, sharpening their pikes, checking their formations, praying to a god who had seen them defeated so many times before. This time, they whispered, would be different. This time, the ground itself would fight for Scotland. Sunday, June 23rd. The battle begins not with trumpets, but with a single act of audacity. Robert Bruce, mounted on a small palfrey, rides forward from the Scottish lines to survey the English position. He wears no armor, only a leather surcoat, and carries a battle axe in his hand. It is a gesture of confidence, or perhaps defiance, meant to show his men that their king does not fear the host arrayed against them. Then, from the English vanguard, a knight sees him. Sir Henry de Bohun, nephew of the Earl of Hereford, spurs his warhorse forward, lance leveled, determined to end the war with a single blow. He charges. Bruce does not retreat. He waits, still as stone, until the last possible moment. Then he jerks his mount sideways. De Bohun's lance passes harmlessly by. Bruce rises in his stirrups, swings his axe in a terrible arc, and brings it down with such force that it cleaves through de Bohun's helmet, through skull and brain, splitting the English knight's head in two. De Bohun collapses from his saddle. The Scottish lines erupt in cheers. The English falter, stunned. Bruce turns his horse and rides back to his men, the axe still in his hand, the haft cracked from the force of the blow. His commanders scold him for the risk. He shrugs. It was necessary. Morale is as much a weapon as steel. The English vanguard, humiliated, attacks in force. The Earl of Gloucester and the Earl of Hereford lead a cavalry charge toward the Scottish position, but they are forced to advance along a narrow road hemmed in by woods. The Scots meet them in tight formation. Pikes thrust forward, a wall of iron-tipped wood that stops the charge cold. Horses scream and rear. Knights are thrown. The English fall back. A second detachment, led by Sir Robert Clifford, attempts to circle around and reach Stirling Castle directly. Thomas Randolph intercepts them with his schiltron, and for an hour men fight on foot, swords against spears, until the English cavalry breaks and flees. The first day ends with the Scots victorious but wary. They have bloodied the English, but the main battle has not yet begun. That night, the English camp is chaos. Men argue over strategy. Supplies are scarce. Morale crumbles. Some commanders urge retreat. Edward refuses. He will not be the king who fled before the Scots. At dawn on June 24th, he orders a full assault. The English army, crammed into the narrow space between stream and river, begins to advance. It is a catastrophic decision. The ground is soft. The formations are compressed. There is no room to maneuver. And the Scots, instead of waiting passively, begin to move forward. Bruce has chosen to attack. It is a gamble, a reversal of medieval logic, but he knows that momentum is more powerful than position. The schiltrons advance in unison, a wall of pikes bristling forward, moving like a single organism. The English cavalry charges to meet them, but the horses will not approach the spears. They shy away, circle, crash into each other. The archers, who should have been stationed to break the schiltrons with volleys, are positioned uselessly behind the cavalry, unable to shoot without hitting their own men. Keith's Scottish cavalry sweeps around the flank and scatters the archers entirely. Now it is simply pike against armor, discipline against desperation. The English line begins to buckle. Men slip in the mud. Horses stumble into hidden pits, their legs snapping, their riders trapped beneath them. The schiltrons press forward, relentless, grinding the English into the marsh. Panic spreads. Knights try to retreat but find themselves hemmed in by their own numbers. The Bannockburn, once a minor stream, becomes a killing ground as men in full armor fall into the water and drown, unable to rise. The Scottish pike thrust is mechanical, efficient, brutal. Forward, thrust, step, forward. The battle becomes a slaughter. Edward's bodyguard surrounds him and forces him from the field. He flees toward Stirling Castle, then realizes the castle is about to surrender, and turns south instead, riding desperately for the border. Behind him, his army disintegrates. Some try to fight. Most run. The Scots pursue, cutting down the fleeing English for miles. By noon it is over. The greatest army England has ever sent to Scotland lies broken in the mud. The morning of June 24th had begun with English confidence bordering on arrogance. By noon, that confidence had curdled into terror. The precise moment of reversal is difficult to pinpoint, for battles do not turn on single acts, but on accumulations. 1,000 small failures that coalesce into collapse. Perhaps it was when the Scottish schiltrons, instead of waiting passively, began to advance. Perhaps it was when the English cavalry realized their horses would not charge into the bristling pikes. Perhaps it was when the hidden pits claimed their first victims, and horses screamed and fell, and knights in full-plate armor found themselves trapped in mud. Or perhaps it was simply the realization, spreading through the English ranks like a contagion, that they were not winning. The English had expected intimidation to do half their work. They had marched with banners flying, with knights in gleaming armor, with thousands of infantry stretching to the horizon. They had assumed the Scots would see this display and lose heart. Instead, the Scots knelt in prayer before the battle, then rose and walked toward the English with the grim determination of men who had nothing left to lose. The psychological impact was devastating. The English commanders, used to enemies who broke at the sight of cavalry, found themselves facing an enemy who would not break, who advanced even as horses reared and lances shattered against their pikes. Discipline shattered first among the English infantry. Crammed into a narrow space, unable to see what was happening ahead, they felt the pressure of bodies pushing from behind and the terror of rumors spreading through the ranks. Men began to slip away, first individually, then in groups. The archers, who should have been the deciding factor, were scattered by Keith's cavalry and never reformed. Without ranged support, the cavalry was left to charge alone into formations designed specifically to stop them. It was suicide, dressed as chivalry. Then came the moment that sealed England's fate. From the slopes above the battlefield, a mass of camp followers, servants, laborers, the ragged tail of the Scottish army, appeared waving improvised banners and shouting. They were not soldiers, but to the English already on the edge of panic, they looked like fresh reinforcements. The rumor spread. The Scots have a second army. The Scots are surrounding us. We are trapped. And once that belief took hold, no amount of courage could dispel it. Men who had fought bravely moments before turned and ran. The retreat became a rout. Robert Keith's cavalry, held in reserve throughout the battle, now unleashed itself on the fleeing English. It was not a glorious charge, but a grim pursuit, cutting down men who had thrown away their weapons, who stumbled in the marsh, who begged for mercy that was rarely given. The Bannockburn, that modest stream, became a graveyard. Armored knights fell into the water and could not rise, drowning under the weight of their own protection. Bodies piled up so thickly that men crossing later had to walk on corpses. Edward II, surrounded by his bodyguard, fled the field in disgrace. He rode first to Stirling Castle, only to be told by its commander, Sir Philip Mowbray, the very man he had come to rescue, that the castle was about to surrender and could not shelter him. Edward turned south, riding through the night with a small escort, chased by Scottish raiders who nearly captured him. He reached the border with barely 500 men. Behind him, an army of 20,000 had been annihilated. 34 English barons and knights lay dead. Thousands of infantry had been slaughtered or captured. Entire noble families were extinguished. The Scottish losses were negligible. 2 knights, several hundred infantry. It was not merely a defeat, it was a repudiation. The greatest military power in Britain had been destroyed by a nation that by rights should not have existed. The immediate aftermath of Bannockburn was carnage. For 3 days, the Scottish army pursued the remnants of Edward's host southward, capturing nobles for ransom, seizing baggage trains filled with gold, weapons, and supplies. Stirling Castle surrendered as promised. With it fell the last symbol of English control in Scotland. Robert Bruce, who had spent 8 years fighting from the shadows, now stood unchallenged as King of Scots, his authority confirmed not by papal decree or English recognition, but by the most brutal arbiter of medieval legitimacy, victory in open battle. For Scotland, Bannockburn was a resurrection. The nation that Edward the Iron had tried to erase in 1296 had clawed its way back from oblivion. Towns rejoiced, churches rang their bells. Bards composed poems that would be sung for centuries. Bruce used the momentum to launch raids deep into northern England, burning towns, extorting tribute, forcing the English to negotiate from a position of weakness. He captured Berwick in 1318, securing Scotland's southern border. In 1320, the Scottish nobility sent the Declaration of Arbroath to Pope John XXIII, a letter so eloquent in its assertion of national sovereignty that it is still quoted today. For as long as but 100 of us remain alive, never will we on any conditions be brought under English rule. It is in truth not for glory, nor riches, nor honors that we are fighting, but for freedom, for that alone, which no honest man gives up, but with life itself. The Pope lifted Bruce's excommunication. European monarchs began to recognize Scotland as an independent kingdom. In 1328, Edward II's successor, Edward III, signed the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton, officially acknowledging Scottish independence and Robert Bruce as its rightful king. Bruce had achieved what Wallace could not: recognition. He died a year later in 1329, at the age of 55, his body ravaged by what was likely leprosy. His heart was cut from his chest and carried on crusade by James Douglas, a final act of the warrior king who had saved a nation. For England, Bannockburn was a catastrophe that resonated for generations. Edward II's reputation never recovered. The defeat emboldened his enemies among the barons, leading eventually to his forced abdication in 1327 and his murder soon after, the first English king deposed by his own subjects. His son Edward III learned from Bannockburn the lesson that cavalry alone could not win wars. He rebuilt the English army around longbowmen and disciplined infantry, creating the force that would dominate the 100 Years' War and win victories at Crécy, Poitiers, and Agincourt. Ironically, the tactics that destroyed England at Bannockburn became the foundation of England's later triumphs. The battle also marked a shift in European warfare. Medieval combat had long been dominated by mounted knights, the armored elite who saw infantry as little more than obstacles. Bannockburn, like the Battle of Courtrai in 1302, demonstrated that disciplined infantry could not only resist cavalry but defeat it decisively. The age of chivalry did not end at Bannockburn, but it was wounded there, and the wound would prove mortal. 700 years later, Bannockburn remains the defining moment of Scottish identity. It is commemorated in statues, in songs, in the very landscape where the battle was fought. The Bannockburn Heritage Center stands near the site, and each year thousands visit to walk the ground where 7,000 farmers defeated an empire. The battle's legacy is not merely military but moral, a reminder that nations are not erased easily, that courage and discipline can overcome overwhelming odds, that freedom, once tasted, is worth any sacrifice to preserve. And on that field, beneath the smoke and the broken steel, the destiny of an age was rewritten, not by kings alone, but by common men who stood their ground when every rational calculation told them to flee.